Hello, students. Welcome to the 50th session of Paper 8. In this session, we will learn about the analysis of the novel. Part 2 of the novel begins with the ominous statement, "So it was all over." Hardly the words of a giddy newlywed. These first lines betray Rochester's immediate apprehensions regarding this hasty marriage to a woman he hardly knows. From his perspective, we see the idiosyncrasies of his Creole bride and the strangeness of the lush and wild tropical landscape that he was not familiar with. The trip away from Spanish Town and the honeymoon to a remote windward island reflects a movement away from the more colonial and civilized areas of the Caribbean to a more remote, pristine area of the West Indies, where nature dominates human affairs and views. As they move away from the Spanish town, Rochester's privilege as a white Englishman diminishes. He becomes an alien outsider, outnumbered by a community that is indifferent and hostile. His feeling of being watched in his section mirrors Antoinette's own paranoid fears in Part 1. Here, Rochester too reads contempt in the faces of the black servants. Rochester searches for traces of England in the strange world around him. He compares the red tropical land of parts of England and finds books by Byron and Scott on the bookshelf. He tries to imagine his wife as a young English girl in an attempt to comfort himself in his decision to marry her. When Antoinette hands him a drink of water, Rochester imagines that, looking up smiling, she might have been any pretty English girl. He already wonders about the truth of her pure English descent, marveling at her interactions with the black servants, and silently disapproving of her refusal to assert rank with them. He feels physically uncomfortable in the hot climate of the Indies. Although mostly recovered from his fever, he still imagines that the green hills are closing in around him. From the outset of his story, Rochester often feels antagonized by a natural landscape that he associates with his wife and her Creole background. As a small estate passed from mother to daughter, Grandbois represents the Causeway women's inheritance. Significantly, it is far removed from Spanish Town, the white nexus of power in the West Indies, more intimately linked with the natural world and the Afro-Caribbean culture of magic. The Creole women in the Causeway family find their home on the outskirts of the colonial outposts. Necessarily, Rochester is an outsider in such a place. Even in its very name, Grandbois, which means great forest, contributes to its atmosphere of isolation and mystery, as an allusion to Antoinette's recurring forest nightmare. The name foretells of violence and danger. That Grandbois is located near the ominous surrounding massacre further enhances its sense of threat. In the second section, dreams and deceptions muddle reality, forcing the readers to ask what is real and what is not. Both feelings of the physical landscape and the natural deceive. At the wedding, deceit reigns as Rochester feigns his love for Antoinette. He fools everyone except the servants with his mask of congeniality, love, and admiration. Like these feelings, the physical landscape is false, at least for Rochester, when he and Antoinette argue about which land is more real, England or the West Indies. He says that the West Indies is a dreamlike and unreal place. He feels like a zombie or sleepwalker in this land, much like Antoinette's own mother during her final days at Colibri. Reality seems elusive and underground, tangled with dreams and deceit. Animals and plants dominate in the imagery of the section, a glimpse of the natural world that offers insight into race's principal characters. Antoinette's story about rats, for example, manifests her fear of being watched and followed. The repeated images of petals falling from blooming flowers reflect the fragility of Antoinette's beauty and the quick collapse that one careless touch might cause. The moths and beetles that fly into the candle flames during the couple's first dinner at Grand Bourg recall the feverish state of both characters. Both Rochester and Antoinette have suffered near fatal fevers in the past, as if to represent their emotional volatility and their inability to cope up with a strange and menacing world outside. These images of death by fire also echo the parrot's fate at Colibri and presage Antoinette's own death at the close of the novel. Antoinette and Rochester both appear overwhelmed by the lush tropical world. Rochester, who is not used to the powerful sights and scents of living natural environment, feels particularly assaulted by its onslaught. The night, with its bright stars and fragrant flowers, operates to heighten the mood of mystery and sensuality that marks the couple's first nights together. As they begin to hunger for one another physically, Rochester and Antoinette succumb to the powerful and primitive atmosphere of their isolated surroundings. Sexually free, Antoinette also feels emotionally free as she explores her inner gloom. It is only at night that Antoinette whispers a secret sadness to her husband, hiding behind the safety of darkness. In the third section, we see the introduction of Daniel Cosway deepens Race's exploration of inherited suffering. With a white father and a black mother, Daniel represents the racially split counterpart to Antoinette's culturally split identity. He is even more dramatically torn between the races than his fully white sister. Like Antoinette, whose mother disowns and rejects her, Daniel is also rejected as a bastard son. He also suffers the indignities of his parentage and is powerless to change his inherited stigma. As rejected children, Daniel and Antoinette share their sense of isolation, displacement, and anger. Although Daniel claims he is motivated by a charitable Christian kindness, his letter betrays a deeply rooted spitefulness. Rochester's walk into the forest echoes Antoinette's recurring nightmare. Like his wife, he feels confused and alone as he enters the woods. The landscape comes to represent his interior world as he stumbles forward on a path he does not recognize or understand. Feeling watched on all sides and cruelly deceived, the small girl who screams and runs when she spots Rochester in the woods aggravates his feeling of isolation and strange alienation. He is a terror to women who seem to recognize evil in him. Interestingly, Rochester's own mother is never mentioned. He seems totally uninitiated into the world of women. When Rochester returns to Granbourg and finds Antoinette's room bolted, it is as though he is closed from all sides. Reading the book about Obeah practices only serves to increase Rochester's feelings of persecution. We later see that in his lunatic wife. He unknowingly creates the sort of zombie that the Obeah book discusses, practicing his own magic and depriving her of her essential spirit. In the fourth section, which is narrated by Antoinette, affords us a glimpse of her own impressions regarding Rochester. England and her current unhappiness, her narration draws Christophine back toward the center of the plot, whereas Rochester's narration has pushed Christophine to the margins. This focus on Christophine shifts the balance of power away from the white estate of the Creole landowner to the simple two-room dwelling of a black ex-slave. Crossing lines of race and class, Antoinette's journey to Christophine's home reflects an instability in the traditional structures, and it invites a reversal of roles in which the ex-slave plays the part of knowing patriarch and the Creole heiress begs for her help. Premonitions of evil haunt Antoinette's thoughts and surroundings landscapes. The movement away from Granbourg to the Mons Moors Rock or Dead Ones forecast the plot downward trajectory from the life of the forest to the spiritual death that awaits both Rochester and Antoinette. Indeed, Antoinette herself senses the evil that awaits her. She sees signs of betrayal in the cock crowing, and she feels that England will be a cold and unwelcoming place. Like her haunting forest dreams, these premonitions suggest that Antoinette possesses of a sort of sixth sense, a gift that ties her to the supernatural, magical world of Christophine. However, Antoinette's whiteness and her European heritage render her unfit for the use of Obeah magic. Indeed, Christophine senses something taboo in giving Antoinette the option. The exchange of money, a colonial accessory of power, for the rites of a spiritual ceremony sullies the transition and seems to spoil the potion, subvert its effects. It seems that nothing can protect Antoinette from her downfall now. Evil haunts her and her actions, her surroundings. In the fifth section, we see, as with Antoinette's visit to Christophine, Rochester's visit to Daniel marks a reversal of the racially dictated power structure. The white Creole and English colonial seek help from the less privileged. In Daniel's home, Rochester has no choice but to listen to Daniel, whereas at Grandbourg, Rochester can exercise complete patriarchal control, ignoring whomever he pleases, including his wife. Before he visits Daniel, Rochester must first swallow his pride and admit his own doubts and vulnerability. Unlike Antoinette, who eagerly visits Christophine's home in search of comfort and wisdom away from Grandbourg, Rochester must be threatened into visiting Daniel. He is loath to lend credence to an uneducated islander, a mixed race Creole. Most of Daniel's actions revolve around money, including his relationship to women. Just as Christophine avoids marriage in order to keep her money to herself, Daniel remains single. He aims to remain financially independent, as he explains. I don't have to please no woman, but me this and buy me that. Demons incarnate, in my opinion. Yet, moments later, Daniel himself adopts a subservient, stereotypically female role when he asks Rochester for money in exchange for his own discretion. Money prevents Daniel's gender role. Indeed, most of the interaction in Reese's novel appear money driven. Rochester and Mason marry for financial reasons, just as Christophine and Daniel shun marriage for financial reasons. In the sixth section, we see that the night has fallen at Colibri Estate. Earlier, when Antoinette, and Rochester visit the homes of Christophine and Daniel, respectively, the day's light is dazzling, symbolic of reason and enlightenment. The day setting mirrors the character's quest for insight and guidance. The darkening night in this section symbolizes a shift towards a irrational, enigmatic world of passion and violence. In the seventh section, we see, ironically, the love potion that Antoinette gives her husband sends him to the arms of another woman, Emily, the slave. A concoction brewed in the Caribbean and installed with foreign wisdom, the potion is not compatible with Rochester's system. When he becomes violently ill, it is as though he is purging himself of any desire or comparison towards Antoinette. Indeed, he begins to hate her even more, treating her in a very bad way. In the eighth section, we see the confrontation between Christophine and Rochester, which pits the feminine world of the tropics against Rochester's more rational and masculine, according to Rochester's worldview, English culture. Both culture and gender collide in this encounter. Authoritative defiant, Christophine breaks every cordial taboo. She is a black servant who condemns and humiliates a wealthy white man. In the next section, the ninth, we see the description of the island bear increasingly similarity to England, mirroring Rochester's movement back to his own terrain. Just as Rochester wills all emotion out of Antoinette's eyes, so he wills all tropical elements of the landscape. He commands the brazen sun to leave the sky as he repeats the word, no sun, no sun. He thus forces his own impressions on the landscape, which begins to appear more cool and grey. In a sense, Rochester has gained as much mastery over the land as he has already gained over Antoinette. Indeed, he explicitly conflates Antoinette with the land when he describes her as a tropical tree broken by the wind. He serves as the wind that has forcibly uprooted her from her native soil. Rochester has asserted control over the tropics. That Antoinette appears lifeless seems to confirm her earlier description of two deaths. She is a living corpse, a hollow shell. It is as if Rochester has appropriated Obeah magic to his own cruel purposes. By thinking and wishing Antoinette dead, he has made her lifeless. Rees thus manifests the dangerous power of the unconscious mind as well as a close link between fantasy and reality. An emblem of feeling, the sobbing boy shows how cruel Rochester has become. The boy exposes his emotions with an openness that the Englishman scorns. Rochester, shut off from the world of feeling, cannot comfort the boy or even communicate with him. The boy hasn't learned any English that Rochester can understand. Even though Antoinette says that the boy has been trying hard to learn it. The boy's insensibility to communicate and inability to communicate with Rochester highlights the cultural and linguistic barricades which differentiates and makes a huge block between the Englishmen and the natives. It is this misunderstanding that makes Rochester pitiless and harsh. By the end of this section, and by the end of this particular part, we immediately get to know that there is something extremely bad that is going to happen with Antoinette imminently, which we shall see in the next section. Thank you.